Sandra Hockley, and I'll be looking at special education status as a predictor of parental involvement. Parents carry a great responsibility to oversee the growth of their children emotionally, spiritually, physically, and academically. The Word of God says, "Lo, children are an heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. As arrows are in the hand of a mighty man, so are children of the youth. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with the enemies in the gate." From Psalms 127, 3-5, King James Version. So I was interested in some variables due to being a parent myself of a teenager who's on the autism spectrum. And I was interested in knowing the correlation between special education and the level of parental participation that the students perceive. There may be a variety of contributing factors which explain why parents are more involved in their child's education than others. Tolson and Lemons found a cultural component which indicated that white parents were more involved in academics than other ethnic groups. And this correlated with higher performances in studies. The study also showed parents who did not have English as a first language were less likely to come to their child's school. It also demonstrated that these parents tended to be from neighborhoods with higher rates of crime. This study highlighted the deficiencies in students of color, secondary to less parental involvement. So how far should parents go? There was a teacher in Montclair, New Jersey, who decided to give parents of his freshmen homework. And it was pretty expensive. So that was his way of measuring parent participation or lack thereof. And he actually used the parental participation to factor into the grades that the students got. So I think a lot of people thought that wasn't fair, but it was interesting, to say the least, of how he went about getting families more involved in students' assignments and work and achievement. So we will talk about what this actual study looked at in terms of parental involvement. It was not at the extent of the teacher in Montclair, New Jersey. That's for sure. So there are vital components of parental involvement. And then especially when it comes to children in special education, there are characteristics like parental presence, verbalizing needs of students, making hard choices, and things of that nature. Many parents, have to battle with school districts about, the schools that their special education students attend, and they have to be vocal, they have to be persistent, and they have to be, outright with what their needs are for their children. So what I was looking for, I thought I would find that there was no difference between parental involvement with non-special education students and parental involvement with special education students. But what I really was hoping to see was that students in the special education cohort reported more parental involvement, just for the purpose of more advocacy for students in special education at the secondary level. The special education classification is a very vulnerable population. There was a study that looked at students in special education, and particularly students with intellectual disabilities came from certain socioeconomic backgrounds and also cultural groups. They found that students on the autism spectrum did not necessarily correlate to certain socioeconomic or minority groups. So it kind of shed light on why that was and what the need was going forward to assist these students. So getting back to this study, the null population informally is that there is no significant difference in the amount of parental involvement a family will have, whether the student is in special education or non-special education. So what we're saying is that both groups will report the same amount of parental involvement. The alternate hypothesis, informally, is that there is a significant difference in the amount of parental involvement given to students based on whether they are in special education or non-special education, or regular education, however you want to say it. Okay. So the method used. So this was given to us. The participants of the study are from the high school in a large public district of Los Angeles County. The original study included 1,833 students. And as I was looking at the data, I found that 45 students did not answer questions pertaining to parental involvement. So I went about this omitting those 45 students. And I did find out later from the professor that I did not have to do that. But I did it in this study, and I even went a little overboard and I ended up omitting 52 students. So that is my fault there, but I wanted to be transparent. So my sample size went down to 1,781 students. Of those 1,781, you see the statistics here, 50.8% were females, and you have 49.2% were male. I don't know how we have points here, but this is how it's indicated. And then it shouldn't say what are the percentages. I just answered that. But you have 28% in ninth grade and 29% in 10th and 19.8% in 11th grade and 22.5% in 12th grade. So it looks like our biggest group was the 10th graders. The data was collected from the entire student body by the administration as part of the school's accreditation self-study. So this was information given to us by Dr. Crosby. Okay. So the two variables I looked at, which I've already alluded to in my title, were special education and parent involvement. Special education is a nominal level variable. It's coded very simply in the key as if you are in non-special education or regular education, you indicated that with a 0, and if you were in special education, you indicated that with a 1. The parent involvement scale is parent involvement is a scale level variable, and we know here that the researchers used the Likert scale, and I just indicated some of the questions that the students had to answer. So this study is pertaining to the students' perception of their parents' involvement. So you have 4 indicators here. My parents know how to support me, my learning environment at home. They feel welcomed at my school. They know how I'm doing in school, and they help out at my school. Okay. So I ran a host of tests, and I'll just go over briefly what I did here. I used an independent samples t-test, which I felt was most significant for this type of analysis. It's appropriate because I'm comparing the means of 2 independent groups. The independent variable is a nominal dichotomous, and the dependent variable is a scale. So to test the assumption of normality, I generated a descriptive statistics table of family involvement or parent involvement broken down by student classification, whether they were in special education or not. Visually, I inspected the distribution of each group for outliers by using a box plot. And to test the assumption of homogeneity of variance, I ran a t-test. I found the practical significance of my findings by calculating the effect size of the difference between the 2 means using Cohen's d. To do this, I calculated the pool standard deviation for the 2 groups, and then I went back to the descriptive statistics table to find the standard deviations of the two groups. I plugged those values into the formula to calculate the pooled standard deviation. What I found. So I just indicated some graphs or some charts here. I show you that my sample went down to 1,781 students. I indicated a mean here of it's negative 0.000, and it goes on. And so I highlighted the mean as it best describes this data. They are measured at the scale level of measurement. So going over to the second graph, I try to highlight some means and the standard Ds and the kurtosis and skewness. So with the non-special education condition, the absolute value of the skewness and kurtosis statistics is actually less than 1 for both. And the distribution appears to be approximately normal. That's how I would indicate that or translate that. Within the special education condition, the absolute value of the skewness and kurtosis, again, statistics are less than 1. The distribution appears to be approximately normal. So for the independent sample test, the p-value of Levine's test is greater than 0.05. It's actually 0.72. Thus, the dispersion of the two groups is not significantly different. The assumption of homogeneity is supported. I actually use the equal variances assumed line. I'm interpreting the t-test with this line because the assumption of homogeneity of variance is supported. The p-value associated with the t statistic is greater than 0.05. It's actually 0.611. Thus, the difference between the means of the two groups is not statistically different. Here's my box plot. I wanted to see if there were any outliers here. And as you can see, for the non-special education group, it does reveal some potential outliers below the lowest range. So that tells me that there were some students that reported answers that were not typical of the rest of the students' answers. Over on the special education side, the box plot reveals no potential outliers or extreme observations. Okay, so I calculated the pool standard deviation and got 0.98. The effect size of the difference in the means is negative 0.042, or the absolute, which is 0.042. Based on Cohen's criteria, the observed effect size is 0.042, which is closest to 0.20. Therefore, it should be considered as a very small effect. The difference between the means is not practically significant. My conclusion. I conducted an independent samples t-test to compare the amount of parent involvement students would receive depending on whether they were non-special education students or special education students. Students in the special education condition, M equals 0.037, the standard deviation is 0.966, reported 0.041 more parent involvement, and I got that by subtracting 0.004 from 0.037. Then the students in the non-special education group, their mean is negative 0.004. The standard deviation is 1.0. The difference was not statistically significant. T of 1779 equals negative 0.509. P equals 0.611. Therefore, we fail to reject the null hypothesis that there is no significant difference in the amount of family or parent involvement a family will have, whether the student is in special education or non-special education. Cohen's effect size value, D equals 0.04, suggested a small or minimal level of practical significance. So some limitations of this study, as I stated earlier,